All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Rotem Brayer. Rotem, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Guy.
You're welcome. So Rotem says that eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy helped him change so many lives that it ended up changing his own life. By treating his clients with this transformative therapy, he's realized the limitless power of healing therapists have. When he started providing consultation to newly trained EMDR therapists, he discovered that many therapists needed help and support on their own journey. Many therapists find it hard to navigate the endless flow of information from books, articles, studies, and of course, the internet. To help them learn and grow, Rotem created the EMDR learning community where clinicians read and learn together. And we'll talk all about that as we get going here. Rotem, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Guy.
So before we get going, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Israel. Moved to the States when I was almost 30 for graduate school. And currently I am in Denver, Colorado.
Okay. How do you like Denver?
I love Denver, except for we're having a very difficult winter. We're used to, very cold and then it gets warm, but I lived in Boston before and kind of reminds of Boston, like the snow just gets to be ice and it gets stuck.
Boston's crazy. I've been there.
Yeah.
All right. So let's jump in here. How the heck did you get into this field? How did it start for you?
So how did I get to the field of psychotherapy?
Yeah.
So I did my bachelor's in Israel in communication and management, and I got a job and I was bored to death. I kind of always wanted to be a therapist. I read Freud and Jung since my teens, which I know some people will think that it says something about my own mental health, but I was always drawn to that. And then kind of life got me into communication and management. Didn't love it. Didn't love my job. I always wanted to be a therapist. And then the age of 29, again, almost 30, I decided to move to the United States and do my master's in counseling.
But you said you always wanted to be a therapist. What about therapy excited you or drew you? What was it?
Yeah, I always like talking to people and listening to people. I'm reminded of, I had a girlfriend when I was 13 and 14, and we would hang out and I would put these radio shows that, people just call the radio. I don't know if people still do that. I don't listen to the radio anymore.
Call in radio.
Yeah, call in radio and just talk about their issues in the middle of the night. And I would listen to it. And she was like, "What is wrong with you? Why are you listening? It's not interesting." I'm like, it's actually fascinating. So I always enjoyed communicating with people, different people, learning about them. I have a really good memory for what people are telling me. So I can recall some things that clients told me 5 years ago and 10 years ago.
Wow.
And I have horrible memory when it comes to, for example, driving. Like if I can drive like 100 times to the same place and I want to remember. So I think my brain is wired to be a therapist.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So, okay, you come to the States. That's when you formally start pursuing becoming a therapist.
Yeah.
How do things unfold for you? How do you get introduced to EMDR?
It took almost a decade. So things were okay. I loved I loved my job. But I was not as passionate as I am now since I've been trained in EMDR. So EMDR really changed everything for me from the way I conceptualize my clients' issues to the treatment to, length of treatment. People in EMDR, there's beginning, middle, and end. People come and they work on their, whatever brought them to therapy. And then some people want to continue, and that's fine. But we also end therapy successfully, which is, it keeps amazing me, EMDR and the outcomes that I see. So there was about a decade pre-EMDR, and then EMDR really changed everything.
How were you introduced to it, and what about it, when you were introduced to it, kind of excited you about it?
Yeah, so I heard, the old jokes of like turn your windshield wipers on the way to therapy and all that before I was trained, but I didn't know much about it. So I went to the training. I thought it was going to be another training. I've done many, many trainings. And I remember day one of the basic training, I had this realization that this is why I became a therapist. This is the real thing. Everything I've done so far was kind of warm up for that. And it really changed everything for me.
But say more about that, because EMDR it's a very kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I mean, it's a very distinct process. You're doing something, right? And it's a little different than what talk therapy or even somatic therapy. So what about that drew you in?
Well, it's very different, actually. It's very different, and then it's not. So the way it's being taught, the way EMDR is being taught is very different than anything I've done before. Because in most therapies, when clients come, you do what you do in phase 2 of EMDR, which is help them develop tools to cope. But that's just the beginning of EMDR. And then what happens in EMDR is that, and that's where it becomes technical, you're processing that, these traumatic memories, you're going into, instead of getting away from the trauma or a disturbance, you're going into it, you're activating it intentionally. That's what produces the outcomes, the results. And because this therapy is so technical, I think a lot of people are lost when they get trained and they get overwhelmed and they think that they're messing things up or they're not doing the right thing. And this is why I wrote my book, The Art and Science of EMDR, to help clinicians understand the concept instead of getting overwhelmed, because the training is overwhelming for a lot of people. And I know a lot of people who got trained and then never use it. And I think it's such a waste not to use such a powerful healing tool. I'm calling it a healing tool. It's more than therapy. And I really am passionate about helping other clinicians use it effectively.
So you mentioned your book, and we'll talk more about that, but you also created a learning community. So how did that come about? And specifically, why did you create it?
So it started as a platform to communicate with consultees. So I am an EMDR consultant, and I provide consultations to EMDR therapists. And, I didn't want them to wait until the next time we meet to ask me a question. So I created this platform, and then at some point it just expanded, and we're having so many good things going on there in this community. We have speakers, we have giveaways, we have, weekly challenges. I realized that there are a lot of people like me. Well, maybe not crazy like me, but a lot of people who really like to talk about EMDR and think about EMDR and participate in a discussion and it's so much fun to see this community growing, and it's only for trained EMDR therapists.
Okay.
And people are really, really passionate about having these discussions.
So in the bio, I read that when it says here, when you started providing consultation to newly trained EMDR therapists, you discovered that many therapists needed help and support on their own journey. Many therapists find it hard to navigate the endless flow of information from books and articles. What do you mean by that?
There's a lot of information out there. I think you know that, Guy.
Sure.
We're getting bombarded with information. And when it comes to EMDR, it's a lot of the information is written in a very academic kind of way. And it's people get confused and they really don't know what to do. There's so much information. There's so many protocols. And I think that if people have a resource where they can go and ask some questions and have, we have a variety of EMDR therapists, but it's not just therapists. Some of them were trained, very recently. We have consultants in training, and we have consultants, and we have trainers, and we have, Dr. Jamie Marich is in our community, and Dr. Andrew Dobo is in our community. And so we have trainers, we have all levels, and we all participate in discussions, and we all learn from each other.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's just pause here for a second to thank our sponsors. All right, we are back. So you're obviously very passionate about this, and I love talking to people like yourself who are so passionate about what they do. There are people listening. Like you said in the beginning, not everyone has studied EMDR. What do you think some of our listeners need to know, maybe who haven't studied EMDR, who maybe are a little hesitant? I can't do that for whatever reason. What do they need to know that maybe would allure them or maybe help determine whether they should or shouldn't pursue EMDR?
Well, I think there are two ways to answer this question. First of all, I know that for me and for many of my colleagues, it really made a huge difference in the way we practice, in the way we can help our clients. It's really a transformative form of therapy, or you can call it healing, because clients come with an issue. They come with a set of symptoms. They come with traumatic memories, and they come with, overwhelming anxiety and trauma, and they leave without it. And I know that if I heard myself before EMDR training, I would not really believe it. But once you see it happening over and over and over again, you become so passionate about it because you're really changing people's lives. You're really transforming people's lives. So that's the first way to answer your question. The other way to answer your question, Guy, is that when people get trained, because the modality is so technical, the way it's being taught, people feel like they're losing their authenticity. And I know that's something that you are very passionate about, that we as therapists, we need to be authentic. We need to continue being who we are as a person, as a therapist. And this is one of my big messages of my book, is that you don't have to give it up. Yes, there is a protocol and there are 8 phases and the model is very linear, but in real life, therapy is not linear. Healing is not linear. And you can stay who you are as a person, as a therapist, and you actually should stay who you are and authentic to who you are as a person, as a therapist, because that would produce better outcomes for your clients.
You've said a few times, the way it's being taught.
Right.
Which leads me to believe that there's a way it's being taught that maybe you think isn't the best way it's being taught. Say more.
That's an interesting question, because there are different trainers teach EMDR very differently. But most of them, and not all of them, are teaching it as this is the right way to do EMDR. And if you're doing anything different, left or right, you're wrong and you're going to hurt your client. And the reality is not so black and white, right? Usually it's somewhere in the middle. So again, to write this book and to do my research, I've been in 3 kinds of EMDR or basic EMDR trainings. One is as a trainee when I was trained. Then I was a consultant in training, and I did that with one institute. And then when I became a consultant, I joined Dr. Andrew Dobo, which is by far my favorite EMDR trainer. And I flew all the way to Florida to teach with him or to be a consultant on his training. And they all teach it differently. But a lot of trainers make people feel that this is the only way to do EMDR. And if you're doing anything else, you're going to hurt your client. And in most cases, it's not true.
Can you give us an example, maybe to highlight some of the differentiating factors of EMDR? If a client comes to you, what might it look like if you're going to treat them with EMDR versus, and I know it's very difficult to make these kind of black and white scenarios, but with somatic therapy?
Yeah. So first of all, there's a lot of integration, right? There's a lot of integration. I took a 6-day training of called natural processing that integrates EMDR with somatic therapy, because there's a lot of integration. We work a lot with the body in EMDR, but with EMDR, we are very focused. So we have target memories that are, the trauma. And again, it can be what used to be called big T and little t. So trauma can be, major events like, major car accidents or earthquakes or assaults, or it can be little t, what used to be called little t, and now we call it disturbing life events. That can be when you were in 4th grade, your teacher hated you, and for a whole year, you were bullied by your teacher. That is somewhere.
That's bigger than a little event.
Right.
That's a major event.
But that's registered in your nervous system, and that's still impacting you till this day. Yeah. So we're in the EMDR, we're focused. We're finding these targets, we're finding these memories, and we're being trained to start listening from day one, from intake. What are these memories? It doesn't mean that we have to get them all on, day one, but we're starting to conceptualize it as these events happened and we need to process them. And then we have phase 2. We are teaching our clients affect regulation skills or calming techniques, or this is called the preparation phase in EMDR. And then we're moving toward reprocessing. So again, and there are 8 phases in EMDR. I don't know if you want me to get into all of them, but the idea is that we are focusing on these memories and we're going into the memory. We're activating these neural networks where these memories are stored, and I'm using my fingers for those who are listening only on audio, because memories are not really stored, but it's a good analogy for us to conceptualize what is going on. Memories, when certain memories are being activated, there's certain neurons or groups of neurons that we call neural networks. They're being activated. So we are going into these memories. We're focusing in most cases on the worst part of the memory, but we're maintaining dual awareness. And then that helps the client to process. And I think that one of the most amazing experiences for a lot of EMDR therapists is to check the SUD level. So we have the SUD level, which is subjective unit of disturbance. It's a scale of 0 to 10 that we ask our clients to rate the level of disturbance. And a lot of times we'll start a session and the SUD level will be somewhere high, 8, 9, 10. And after 30 or 40 minutes, it's at 0, 1, or 2. And I know it's hard to believe for people who haven't experienced them, but if you experience EMDR either as a therapist or as a client, it's real. It's happening. It's an amazing experience.
How do you view these different modalities? Do you feel it's a therapist's obligation to, learn all these modalities to the best of their ability? Because obviously, each client is different to a certain degree, and what might be best for one client isn't best for another client. And so it's like you've got to have those arrows in the quiver. What's your perspective on this?
So for me, everything integrates into EMDR. Whatever I learn now, I'm learning, and again, we have a lot of discussions in our community about attachment. So actually tomorrow and Saturday, I'm taking a training about attachment and EMDR. A lot of parts work. Call it IFS, call it ego state therapy, call it whatever you want. We are working with younger parts, a lot of times with younger, vulnerable, hurt parts, in the context of EMDR. So there's a lot of integration. And again, what I love about our community is that we have a lot of people who like to continue learning and they're passionate. They're like, we're EMDR nerds and we're proud of it.
I'm speaking with Rotem Brayer. The book is called The Art and Science of EMDR. What is the best way for people to get in contact with you, Rotem?
They can just Google The Art and Science of EMDR. I created kind of like a little complicated URL or web address for this. So if you Google The Art and Science of EMDR, you will find the website, and there's a way to contact me there.
Okay. Now, in terms of getting into EMDR, beginning to learn about it, how should people go about doing that? How could they do that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question because EMDR, as opposed to other modalities, you're not supposed to practice if you're not formally trained in it. It's not something that you can read a book and experiment with. So the book that I wrote is for trained clinicians or for people who go through the training. But it's not something that people can, just read a book and then start practicing. That can lead to some negative outcomes in terms of, clients' mental state deteriorating because we're getting into the trauma. It can be traumatizing if people, if therapists don't know what they're doing. But they can look at the EMDR International Association, which is EMDR, and there's a list of trainings there. And now there are a lot of virtual trainings, or there's a lot of in person, so people can find their trainings in their geographical area. And there's also EMDR, kind of like EMDR it's called the international, but it's the United States, the EMDR, body in the United States. But there's EMDR Canada, there's EMDR Europe, there are these organizations all over. So people, I know you have listeners from all over the world. So if people are listening to it from overseas, they can look in their country, what's the organization that does all these trainings.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Rotem, love to have you back. Like I said, you're so passionate, and that's what this podcast is about. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right, sir. Take care.
Thank you.